China's doing woke DEI for Tibetans. They don't let my daughter from Shenzhen go to school. I want to send my daughter Li Hao from Shenzhen to the best possible school. She studied real hard. She applied the Confucianist principles, the values appropriately of meritocracy. And now you got them goddamn Tibetans coming in. A reporting shows that far from home, the children are at risk of abuse or of being stripped of their Tibetan identity and bonds with family. Across China's west, the party is placing children in boarding schools in a drive to assimilate a generation of Tibetans into the national mainstream and mold them into citizens loyal to the Communist Party. Tibetan rights activists as well as experts working with the United Nations have said that the party is systematically separating Tibetan children from their families to erase Tibetan identity and to deepen China's control of a people who historically resisted Beijing's rule. China doesn't really invest in Tibet as opposed to Xinjiang because they can't really make trade routes to South Asia over the Himalayas, but Xinjiang is getting a lot of bread because that's how China can link up with Central Asia and consequently the Russian and European markets. Yeah. But also, I think part of the reason why is I don't think that there is as large of a Tibetan resistance movement against like or a Tibet separatist movement in Tibet as opposed to the Xinjiang separatist movement, which caused China to take action that was completely unacceptable, as I've detailed time and time again. I mean, this doesn't necessarily mean that like the situation in Tibet is perfect or great. As far as I understand, it's the classic process of it's not dissimilar to one of the major issues that the USSR fell into. One of the major traps that the USSR fell into with Russification, in spite of the Sino-Soviet split and a very different approach that focuses on learning from the lessons or the failures of the USSR in terms of the current Chinese communist governance. They still do, they still do genuine initiatives to create as much as a monoculture as possible. Oh, that makes sense. Central Committee says China is building the biggest hydroelectric dam in history in Tibet. They just announced it last week. That's why this article is coming out. It will provide clean energy for 330 million homes per year. Okay, that makes sense. It's larger than the Three Gorges. It's going to be Gorgina. From an Indian Tamil perspective, this reads as something similar to what India has been trying to do for decades, which is making states, especially South Indian states, that don't speak Hindi, learn Hindi through force, which is something that Tamil Nadu has fiercely resisted against. I think that this is 100% unacceptable in its entirety if they are not allowed to learn their own culture and their own language. But I don't know. I've heard reports. I've heard people say that they are allowed to do that. I know India is mad as fuck about the dam being built. Yeah. Tibetan rights activists as well as experts working with the United Nations have said the party is systematically separating Tibetan children. They've estimated that around 3/4 of Tibetan students ages 6 and older, and others even younger, are in residential schools that teach largely Mandarin, replacing the Tibetan language, culture, and Buddhist beliefs of the children once absorbed at home and in village schools. When China's top leader Xi Jinping visited one such school in the summer, he inspected a dormitory that appeared freshly painted and as neat as army barracks. He walked into a classroom with Tibetan students, listened to a lecture on Communist Party thought, stood and applauded to welcome him. Mr. Xi's visit to the school in the Qinghai province in June amounted to a firm endorsement of the program, despite international criticism. Education, he said, must implant a shared consciousness of Chinese nationhood in the souls of children from an early age. Chinese officials say the schools help Tibetan children quickly become fluent in the Chinese language and learn skills that help prepare them for the modern economy. They said that families voluntarily send their children to schools which are free and that the students have classes in Tibetan culture and language. But extensive interviews and research by the New York Times show that Tibetan children appear to be singled out by the Chinese authorities for enrollment in residential schools. Their parents often have little or no choice but to send them. Experts, parents, lawyers, and human rights investigators said in interviews, many parents do not see their children for long stretches. Dozens of research papers and reports from experts and teachers within the Chinese system have warned about the anxiety, loneliness, and depression and other psychological harm of the schools on Tibetan children. My nephew no longer gets taught Cantonese in school. It is to ensure that they only speak Mandarin, even though Hong Kong is Guangdong, which is Cantonese speaking. For the record, this isn't me defending China whatsoever, even though people will immediately rush to that judgment here. But the entire purpose of the military and Common Core public schooling and the Common Core curriculum is to literally do this, just so you understand. For every country, this is a universal value. Every nation state on this planet, since nation states have existed, have done this exact same thing. That's what it is. So in terms of the in terms of the educational opportunities like this one, like, people are of two minds where they say, like, this is a residential school, this is exploitative. But we have a process in the United States of America for this as well. Like, I don't think anyone here would say that people that live here in the United States of America shouldn't learn English and get English education. They wouldn't. But there's a reason why the American schools also teach and make you say the Pledge of Allegiance in the morning. And Turkish school makes you sing the national anthem on Monday mornings and then Friday night, and also say the Pledge of Allegiance. Dozens of research papers report from experts, teachers in the Chinese system, and warn about the anxiety. The Times reviewed and analyzed hundreds of videos posted to Chinese social media sites by Tibetan boarding schools, state media, and local propaganda departments that showed how the schools operate and serve the party's objectives. Student life is heavy with political indoctrination. Schools, for instance, celebrate what China calls Serfs Emancipation Day, referring to the anniversary. So once again, I remember the New York Times article from a couple years ago where they were like, the Red Museum in Beijing is filled to the brim with historical inaccuracies. And it's so funny because the report basically was just describing a museum. Virtually every museum, both in the Western world and also in China, okay, serve that same purpose. And they were very upset that Beijing had made a museum and, I don't know, weren't talking about how they killed 700 Gorillion people or something. And I thought that was really funny because it's like, yeah, of course, like, well, one, what are you saying? That's ridiculous. And two, even if that was the case, why? No nation state is going to do that. Have you been to an American museum? What the hell? Dude, I went to a naval undersea museum, which was cool, but historical inaccuracy is an understatement here. No, that's what I'm saying. It's like a two-tiered structure in the way that American media, Western media covers China versus Western media covers itself. But because Western media is private rather than like state-owned broadcasters in general, we often have this tendency to think like, no, these are independent outlets. They do not have some specific interests.
This street has many Tanka painting studios, and at this time, every studio has an artist who's painting now.
青金石、绿松石、金子，就是你们别看我们这边有黄金，但是黄金其实在比起这些矿物。
As far as what China is doing here, as long as students are still taught their own culture and their own language, I don't see an issue with it. But if they're actually forcibly bringing people into boarding schools and also forcibly teaching them Mandarin and nothing else, then no, that is not acceptable. That is completely unacceptable. That is yet another instance of a major power player in the world engaging in the destruction of cultural remnants of a population that they are dominating. Student life is heavy with political indoctrination. Schools, for instance, celebrate China calls Serf Emancipation Day, celebrating the anniversary of the Communist Party's full takeover of Tibet in 1959, after a failed Tibetan uprising and a Chinese crackdown that forced the Dalai Lama into exile. The party accuses the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan spiritual leader, of having ruled over a slaveholding society. Dude, it's kind of crazy. Japan did this with the Ainu, and only now is the culture being restored. No, they did this with the Ainu so successfully that I don't think the culture will ever be fully restored. I'm confused by this. I'm confused by this because it's like, this is not like, what do you mean accused? Like, this is like, there was a serfdom implemented in Tibet at the time. Tibet had historically been under Chinese rulership, but had some semblance of autonomy. This is before the KMT. This is like predating. I'm talking about Chinese empire, in and out of Chinese governorship, but the former nationalist control over Tibet allowed Tibet to do whatever it wanted, and it still had it still absolutely had serfdom and torture. I mean, this is like relatively well documented. So I'm just kind of surprised that the New York Times is just openly saying this was an accusation. The Times also found video accounts of boarding school teachers and travels that showed how some schools are underfunded and overstretched. We are not crediting some of the accounts by name to avoid drawing backlash against them. China has been expanding its boarding schools for Tibetan children, even as countries like the United States, Canada, and Australia have been grappling with the trauma inflicted on generations of indigenous children. Yeah, they're really grappling with that trauma. Come on. China has been eager to show that happy, well-fed Tibetan children are proudly declaring that they are Chinese. Chung Ken Sumdo Town, Tibetan Boarding Central Primary School, 10-cent video. Wait, what is this? I heard from some drama farmer YouTuber that your take on this matter is incredibly stupid. Yeah. I wonder what the drama farming YouTuber knows about like historic conditions or not only just like the conditions of serfdom in Tibet, but also outside of that, like the long and extensive history of Chinese empire and its control that it's maintained over Tibet, allowing Tibet to operate autonomously while still, entertaining the notion of serfdom existing until Mao Zedong. I work at a major news outlet. I think you're just a dumb guy. True. I am a dumb guy. You cooked on that. They should show the kids Sopranos. Oh my God. All right, let's continue with the article. Strangers to their own homes. Gallo, a Tibetan education researcher, became alarmed by the boarding schools in 2016 when he saw that his two preschool-aged grandnieces were who were attending one of his hometown in northwestern China prefer to speak Mandarin, not Tibetan. When the grandnieces, then aged 4 and 5, went home on the weekend, he said in an interview they appeared withdrawn and spoke awkwardly in Tibetan with their parents. Much changed from when he saw them in the previous year. Now they behave like strangers in their own home, he said. I said to my brother, what if you don't send them to the boarding school, Gyalo said. He said he had no choice. Gyalo set out to investigate the changes families were going through as the schools expanded across Tibetan regions in China. Over the next 3 years, he visited dozens of such schools and saw that many Tibetan students spoke little of their mother tongue and were sometimes only able to see their parents once every several weeks or even months. Children as young as preschool age were being sent away, he said, and parental visits were limited. The Times talked to 3 Tibetan parents with children of elementary school age and residential schools who said they had no choice and that they were not allowed to visit their children at will. Many Tibetan parents accepted their children should learn Chinese for a chance at a better job, said Gyalo, who now lives in Canada and is an activist working to draw attention to the schools. But also, most want their children to first gain a strong grounding in their mother tongue. Yeah, this is my attitude as well. Like, as long as they still as long as they still learn in their mother tongue and that they also learn Mandarin, I wouldn't see a problem with this. I think the issue in and of itself is whether or not this is done by force, or what the parents mean when they say they have no other options. Do they have no other options because they live in a remote village where there is no like Tibetan first education readily available? Or is there no options because the Chinese government's like, yeah, you have to send. What is this? Gyalo works for an NED affiliated NGO. The Tibet Action Institute is a human rights organization that campaigns against censorship, propaganda in schools, and surveillance by the People's Republic of China targeting Tibetan people. The organization also provides Tibetans with digital tools and strategies to create prevalent and nonviolent protests against the actions of the Chinese government. Tibet Action Institute is a human rights organization created in 2009 to assist Tibetans. After large protests were held before the Beijing Olympics in 2008, the organization provides activists in Tibet with digital tools and strategies focused on nonviolent protests and tools to defend against cyber attacks, censorship, and surveillance from the government, People's Republic of China. The organization was founded by Ladong Tatong, who previously worked as an executive director for Students of Free Tibet. She received the James Lawson Award for Nonviolent Achievement by the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict in 2011. Is the co-chair of the International Tibet Network, a coalition of Tibet-related NGOs. The Tibet Action Institute received the 2019 Democracy Award from National Endowment for Democracy, a private nonprofit grant-making organization that supports the development of democratic institutions around the world. Though formerly private, the NED is almost entirely funded by the United States Congress. Oh, man. I'm once again reminded of the many different... What kind of job opportunities you have with only Tibetan language? Limited. Very limited. This same stuff was always a point of contention with the USSR, a facet I'm actually researching currently. Cold Warriors always took any push for Russian to mean intense Russification, but now most scholars see it, at least with some more nuance, since many minorities in the non-Russian republics saw Russia as a power to empower them over national leadership. The National Endowment for Democracy is not, I mean, it is the CIA. That is what it is, like, quite literally. Yeah, look, ultimately, you can't necessarily spark any sort of like real momentum if there isn't any sort of real harm. Okay. So what I mean by that is I'm sure that there are very real issues in terms of Chinese governorship over, and there are very real issues in terms of Chinese governorship over Tibet. Okay? Many of said issues could be addressed through economic improvement for the most part, and also by not necessarily trying to, the term isn't Hanifying, but, you know, not necessarily creating a incentivized or by force, I guess Hanification structure, not the appropriate term here, but regardless. In terms of like people's real gripes, cynicization is better. Yes. Cynicization. Sure. Cynicization. The point is, America can't operate successfully if there isn't any real gripes from the local governance. They can't just like simply give money to people and hope that and hope that there is some momentum. Okay. But this is pretty commonplace in terms of like wherever America has any interest of destabilization, they will look at real gripes and real anger and real resentment that the local population has towards any of our foreign adversaries, and they will greatly overemphasize it in Western media. They will use terms oftentimes that they obfuscate when talking about America's very similar crimes and much worse crimes, as a matter of fact, and we'll turn around and say, like, this is what China's doing. I mean, we might have even done it in the past. Who knows? But like China's doing it right now and much worse. So I don't know what the exact, like, I don't know what the best, I don't know what's going on here. But if this is what's happening and they're being forcibly taken into residential schools and then also simultaneously forcibly only learning Mandarin, then that is completely unacceptable. And I think that the best possible way to combat any sort of American intervention, Western influence in this regard, is to focus on economic development, economic opportunities, and improving the lives of Tibetan citizens and not interfering in their cultural affairs, which, of course, China has done for quite some time with the controversies surrounding the Dalai Lama. Controversies that are not born out of like pure hatred or anger, but also to a certain degree are serving a security purpose, considering what we just talked about with respect to the CIA giving the Dalai Lama money and using the Dalai Lama as a beacon of Tibetan emancipation from the treacherous nature of Chinese empire. Children learn from their grandparents and their parents about their local language. Under Xi, such schools have sharply cut classes in Tibetan. Instead, most classes are taught in Chinese. Wait, what? So they do teach Tibetan. Chinese officials insist that enrollment is voluntary. In reality, the government has closed village schools and privately run Tibetan language schools while strictly enforcing mandatory education laws. One can hardly speak of any choice if local schools are all closed down. He and two other independent experts of the United Nations investigated the boarding schools and expressed alarm in 2023, and what they said appeared to be a policy of forced assimilation of the Tibetan identity into the dominant Han Chinese majority. Text messages and voice memos trickled in, carrying urgent questions from Tibetans in China seeking legal advice about the treatment of children in boarding schools. One man wrote to ask about what redress to demand for a child who suffered permanent injury in a classroom fight while the teacher was absent. Another said that the child was found dead in the bathroom of a boarding school of unclear causes, and that the child's parents wanted answers. The questions have been sent over the past 3 years to volunteers offering online legal advice to Tibetans. Times reporters reviewed several such messages, which were shared with us, but were unable to independently verify the accounts. This is just a Chinese Moms for Liberty type person. No, it would be a Tibetan Moms for Liberty type person. New York Times would be like, yeah, what the Tibetan population needs is school vouchers, school choice. Yeah, there's long been protests surrounding and controversy surrounding language education policies in Tibet. In 2021, a video surfaced online showing an elementary school teacher in eastern Tibet beating a child with a chair in his classroom. The video circulated on the internet in China more than 1,000 times before it was taken down. The school at which the beating took place has been described in state media reports as having students who lived on campus. Sure, Israel's been determined to be committing scholasticide, but have you considered that the New York Times is breaking news about a teacher abusing a student in rural Tibet once? Yeah, I mean, that's what's so wild about what's going on here is that, and I have talked about this before, where it's like people will come in here while I'm in the midst of covering like what Israel is doing and be like, dude, but you never talk about China. And then the story that they come to me that they want me to cover desperately is like the Chinese Coast Guard spraying a Filipino fishing boat with water. And it's like, bro, we're dropping 6,000 pound bombs on schools and mosques and hospitals. And you're like, they're playing water wars over there. Like, look at how bad it is. And it's always the same But dude, you never talk about China? That's not true. I talk about China all the time. As a matter of fact, I talk about it very frequently, which is why a lot of people get very mad and say, Hasan, you're pro-China unconditionally. China does a lot of good and China does a lot of bad, as any state does. I'm currently in the process of reading a New York Times article, but the point remains, which is that, like, in order to put together a narrative that this is like genuinely devastating, and there is some evidence, especially considering what large nation states have done, okay, to wipe out certain aspects of cultures that exist within a nation state's boundaries without offering them proper autonomy, with the fears that they might separate or whatever. I'm inclined at first glance to not immediately assume that this is all fabrications. This is all lies or anything like that. Okay. Having said that, however, the article then does this very classic thing that virtually every country of origin perceives as completely normal, which is talking about like a random school having an abuse against a student. Like, yeah, no, there's like, this would be akin to China writing an article about like a pedophile teacher that was outed, like a gym teacher in an Ohio suburb. You know what I mean? Like, can you imagine the largest publication in China writing an article about like the dangers of American public schooling and talking about how there was a pedophile who was a teacher who was outed as a pedophile in I don't know, Springfield, Ohio. Now, the reason why I'm not talking about the school shootings is because that is a valid thing to cover. If there were that many school shootings happening in China, do you think the New York Times would not cover it? They would literally cover it every single day. They would be like, the Chinese Communist Party is purposely executing and turning a blind eye to the gun violence problem in China. That's what they would be saying every damn day. Well, a 16-year-old living in a Tibetan village in Sichuan province told the Times that beatings by teachers were constant at the residential school he attended. Said that over the years he had accumulated several scars on his back from beating by teachers, sometimes by hand, other times by a wooden ruler. Chinese government does not say how many Tibetan children are in boarding schools. The Tibetan Action Institute, an international group that has campaigned to close the schools, estimates that among children aged 6 to 18, the figure is at least 800,000, or 3 in every 4 Tibetan children. The group arrived at its estimate, which is published in a report in 2021 based on local government statistics. Ladon Tatong, a co-founder and director of the group, likened the Chinese schools to the colonial residential schools in Canada, Australia, and the United States. Now that you read an article of lies, at least watch the video I sent to you to get a balanced view. Okay, bro. Like, calm down. Just because it's an American foreign adversary engaging in these actions doesn't mean that it's entirely untrue. This is the nuance necessary for people to understand. This is why so many people have incredibly black and white opinions on, like, Xinjiang, for example. Different time, different place, different government, but same impacts, she said, in the sense of breaking cultural and familiar bonds and roots. Statistics collected by the Times from local government documents across Tibetan areas shows similar numbers in boarding schools, with some areas notably higher than others. In Galag, a Tibetan area of the Qinghai province, 95% of middle school students were in such schools, according to a study published in 2017 in China's main journal on education for ethnic groups. A report from the local legislature in 2023 said that 45 of the 49 elementary schools in Galag were residential. The expansion of boarding school enrollment in Tibetan areas run counter to the national trend. Chinese government guidelines issued in 2018 say that elementary school children should not, in general, be sent to such schools. But children from ethnic minorities in border regions seem to be treated as an exception. In the far western region of Xinjiang, children of Muslim Uyghur ethnic groups have also been sent to residential schools in large numbers. Chinese officials say such schools help children in the Tibetan region avoid long commutes, but official websites also promote instructions from Mr. Xi on minority education, arguing that youth in ethnic minority regions were at risk of having erroneous ideas about religion, history, and ethnic relations. To counter those threats, Mr. Xi said in 2014, children of the right age should study in school, live in school, and grow up in school. The government's hope is that children will then become champions of Chinese language and the party's values. In one video, which appears to be filmed and uploaded on social media as a part of a school assignment, a Tibetan fourth grader at a boarding school described how she saved the day when a Chinese cashier could not understand the girl's mother, who spoke only Tibetan. She then called on other students to teach their parents Mandarin. Be a civilized person, speak Mandarin, the video was titled. Is ethnic relations racism? Yes. Yes. No, this is 100%. It's there's definitely valid claims and valid concerns. It's true. Like, China is, it's not a secret. China very aggressively pursues assimilation. Okay, they do that. And they have engaged in cultural genocide. People will say Well, that's because it's a necessity, because, you know, American CIA trained Uyghur Islam separatists created an environment of unsafety in Xinjiang. They wanted to separate from China with erroneous claims of independence. And they did a lot of stabbing attacks. And that's why the Chinese government had to do this like comprehensive anti-terror initiative. And I personally find that to be ridiculous overall, because regardless of the veracity of what people are talking about, it is akin to making that argument against undocumented migrants in the United States of America. Okay? Like, it's ridiculous. You can make that argument against black people in America. You can make that argument against anyone. And many right-wingers do. Okay? Americans make the argument all the time. And they say it's good. It's still unacceptable. But yeah, warnings from within China. China's drive to assimilate Tibetans echoes history elsewhere in the world where indigenous people were being seen by their foreign. How shameless of the New York Times. How shameless of the New York Times to talk about the like straight up indigenous genocide and then compare it and say like this is what the Chinese are doing elsewhere in the world. Also, if you ask us, like, it wasn't really a genocide, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, come on, they got casinos. Yeah, the only thing that's comparable is the boarding school aspect of it, because residential schools in the aftermath of an actual genocide was forcible, caused a lot of forcible assimilation. Australia did it to the indigenous population as well. So did Canada. There were practices beyond like teaching the indigenous population English, though. Like horrifying practices, death, destruction, sterilization initiatives, forcible marriages to white people to make the indigenous population more white. So, you know, not saying that what China is doing here is good, but it's kind of wild. Removed from family, not allowed to speak their language, not allowed to practice their cultures, all their cultures were uncivilized. But some of the major difference is this, okay? Look at the conditions of abject poverty in reservations in general to understand whether or not America's interests are to actually integrate and collaborate and have a normal relationship with the indigenous population, which seems laughable when you think about it because we did a genocide to them. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, if the Chinese government engages in like cultural re-education, forcible re-education, in an effort to make the Tibetan population more subservient and then wipe them out or something like that, then it's like, then yeah, the comparison is apt. They're taking Tibetan brides, and forcibly marrying them into like Chinese families or whatever, and consistently keeping Tibet underserved and consistently keeping Tibet poor, just casting them aside, using Tibet as testing grounds for highly radioactive weapons, destroying their water supply, forcing them into concentration camps in the slave labor sweatshops. That's another great example. Those sorts of things are remnants of what, those sorts of actions taken by the government will show you what the priority is. Is the priority to instill some sort of assimilation that is as ethical as possible, which I don't think it is, for the record. Just pointing that out. I don't think what China's doing here is I think what China's doing here is absolutely assimilate, like, for sure. How can they develop that region? Well, you'll see. I mean, a massive dam in the region seems like a good start. Tibet is the fastest growing province as a point of common prosperity. Real growth rate of gross domestic product in China in 2023 by province or region. That's interesting. China's building so much infrastructure in Tibet. Tibetan students get preferential treatments when applying for universities. That'd be really funny if people started talking about affirmative action for Tibetans.
元的里面就是最便宜的，黄金也贵，对吧？但是最便宜的。
珍珠粉、绿松石和黄金。
China's doing woke DEI for Tibetans. They don't let my daughter from Shenzhen go to school. I want to send my daughter Li Hao from Shenzhen to the best possible school. She studied real hard. She applied the Confucianist principles, the values appropriately of meritocracy. And now you got them goddamn Tibetans coming in, taking over government positions. What's next? You're gonna put them in the Communist Party of China leadership? My daughter deserves that. These top government jobs are going to Tibetans. Unironically, there are Chinese hogs that say this. I mean, hog principles are universal. God dang Tibetans taking our goddamn jobs. Anti-DEI hog Han Chinese is an incredible character. Yeah. A lot of the affirmative action policies were put in place during the 50s when the CCP was arguably maximally pro-ethnic minority rights. I'm triggered. They got the goddamn affirmative action in China. Hey, yo. You better stop it now. You better stop it. I'm having a conniption thinking about the goddamn DEI. No taxes in minority regions are required to be sent to the central government. All of it can be spent locally. Minorities receive proportional representation in local government. Higher level jurisdictions ask lower level minority areas to put forth extensive efforts to support the country's construction by providing more natural resources, and in exchange gives them infrastructural subsidies such as personnel training, budgetary subventions, and disproportionate public works investments. The Chinese government encourages business to hire minorities and offer no interest loans to businesses operated by minorities. This actually happens. Most Han Chinese think the CCP is beholden to ethnic minorities. You should see what liberal Chinese say about the Uyghurs. They say the government didn't go far enough. They also believe the government lied about the number of casualties in the Urumqi riots. Oh my God. Oh my God. Listen, now I love Chairman Mao. Peace be upon his name. Lord rest his soul. Okay? That's our founding father right there. As every red-blooded Han Chinese man. Having said that, however, these woke policies, wokeism, what those American dogs call the mind virus, has clearly taken over Xi Jinping. Wokeism is making China less Han. Make China Han again. I don't want to see no goddamn Tibetan serving me my delicious dumplings, which are a Chinese invention. Oh, this is very non-stream. This is such a minority in China. Okay, but it's funny. I'm urging you to build a wall around Tibet. Why are they building a dam? I don't want no Tibetan water powering my Chinese infrastructure. I want to build a wall. What they got over there? Mountains like a wall when you think about it. Build a greater wall, a great wall, an even greater one that we have so far in China. This is hilarious. Historical president Phuc Kangan, a Manchu military leader, recommended for an increase of the quota for the Hui people in a civil and military suishi examinations during a 1785 memorial for the governor of Gansu and Shanxi provinces. Li Zongshan, the Hunan provincial education. Oh my God, bro. They've had DEI and affirmative action in China since 1785. No wonder Americans hate China. Yeah, the Chinese government official more than one child per family instead the one demanded for Han people as a part of the former one-child policy. Rena Singer of Knight Ridder newspapers wrote that in practice, many minority families simply have as many children as they want. Singer wrote that the policies are meant to encourage assimilation instead of empowering minority blocks, and the idea is to give minorities just enough power, education, and economic success to keep them quiet. This is a somber reminder of the same exact thing that the Western media did during the COVID-0 policies that were implemented in China, where they constantly ripped into China while constantly ripping into Donald Trump for having a perma-COVID policy, but then making fun of China for having COVID-0 policies. Okay. And then when public pressure got to a uncontrollable degree and they decided to no longer have the COVID-0 policies in China, they had a massive amount of COVID in China. And then the Western media wrote about how stupid they are. Look, lol, you let COVID roam through your streets. It's the same shit. It's like the state is actually not oppressing the minorities in an effort to just give them enough economic opportunity and some semblance of self-governance so they don't rise up against their Chinese masters. It's like my haters. No matter what I do, they'll find a way to make it seem bad. The affirmative action of the Chinese government has been called into question as of late, especially from ethnic groups of Han Chinese. Unfair policies on Chinese college entrance exams as well as human rights considered to be favoring the national minority have been believed to be causing reverse discrimination in the mainland. Yes. Oh my God. Han chauvinism has been becoming more popular in mainland China since the 2000s, the cause of which has been attributed to the discontent towards Chinese affirmative action. Another talking point is that some ethnic minorities can carry some weapons for cultural purposes. The Han hogs get scared of that too. Oh my God, I want to dive deep and investigate the Chinese Han hogs that have like reactionary opinions. That's so amazing. Oh my God. How dare they get their crazy weapons? God dang. What Muslim mans, they got their weapons and I can't use anything but a butter knife and chopsticks. There are some minorities in China that are allowed firearms for hunting. Number of Manchu speakers at one point after World War II was just down to 8 total. After a few decades, it was restored to tens of thousands. How come they get to have curved swords, but I don't even get to have a butter knife? That's amazing. Yeah. Now that TikTok's getting banned, I'm actually going to move straight to the source and go to Bilibili. Just a FYI, travel to Tibet is still restricted. Foreigners need a Tibetan travel permit. Foreign journalists aren't permitted. Go to Tibet to get a Tibet permit. I mean, you still also need a visa to go to China. Actually, I don't know. Apparently they started doing visa-free travel from South Korea now. So South Koreans have been going crazy. They've been traveling to China like nutty mode because it's close. It's also like relatively close. So many people have been flying into China. Just ask a chatter to send you their parents' WeChat logs. Han hogs literally think Trump is communist quota for perceiving his nationalism from a third worldist perspective, wearing red caps, red being associated with the Communist Party, and opposing liberals, with liberalism being associated with capitalism, neoliberalism. Some of them unironically call him Comrade Trump. Okay, you're just making that up now. Are you telling me that there are Chinese hogs that think Donald Trump is a MAGA communist because he wears a red cap? I'm done. No, that's too much. That's too much internet. That's too much ridiculousness. They need to stop that. That is, oh my God. I'm at a Chinese hog and yet Trump is his phone background. God, I am fascinated with the ways in which people become hogs, dude. In video diaries uploaded to social media, teachers in Tibetan regions have described days in which, on top of teaching, they must also deliver food to students, show them how to make beds, and tuck them in at night. Teacher at elementary school in Tibet who goes by Miss Chen on social media posted a series of video blogs in 2022. In one, she documented a typical day that started with a morning study session before dawn and ended with her checking on the children before bedtime. Another teacher who identifies himself as Mr. Su on social media says he teaches at elementary and secondary school in Nagari, Tibet. He shot a video while patrolling the dormitories of younger students while on duty in one night in 2023. All of us are basically standing in as their parents, he wrote in one social media post. Videos from Chinese travelers show how difficult it can be for rural schools to meet the needs of their students. In 2021, a traveler who recorded a visit to one school in Garzi, a Tibetan area in Sichuan province, said that the dorms looked nice, but there weren't enough beds. 2 children shared a bed and huddled to keep each other warm in the winter, as there was no central heating. Some teachers defended schools as ultimately for the good of the children. Others described encountering widespread opposition to the policy. In China, being left-wing is being socialist and socially conservative, while being right-wing is pro-market and socially progressive. I hate that. I'm sure that there is still a distinction, though, in academia. Or maybe a lot of the academics are pro-market. You can cheese the visa free by getting transit visas. You can go via Hong Kong and then transit visa, then back to Hong Kong if you need to extend it. British man who is a Chinese citizen married to a Chinese woman who is a hog, hates woke, hates Dems, loves China, and has a ton of videos where he rips on America. Yeah, I know. I don't like this guy because, like, at first I watched his videos and I thought it was cool, but then he just, like, he's so gross about homeless people in America. Like, he literally is just like, he's like, yeah, look at all these zombies on the streets of America. This guy's obviously a propaganda machine. Yeah. Like, as a person who is not immediately like, I hate the Chinese Communist Party, their government is poison, it's a parasitic force, it must be eradicated. I'm not like the average American in that regard. I think that, you know, China does a lot of really solid policies that I wish we implemented here in the United States of America, and also a lot of regular big government shit that is completely unacceptable. Having said that, you know, this is the exact type of guy who I should love. You know what I mean? Because he's like so pro-China, showing all the good sides of China when there is an endless faucet of misinformation and hatred being presented in mainstream outlets. And yet, because he's just so aggressively talking about homeless people as though like they're filth that must be destroyed, it frustrates me. It frustrates me. It makes me, it makes me question